Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore all aspects of ending relationships, separation, and parenting apart. If your marriage or partnership has ended, or you have friends and family who are separating, this podcast is for you. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. In each episode, we look at relationships and separation from different angles, including the emotional, legal, and social. I'm joined by experts and special guests who share their own unique stories, experience, and tips, with the goal of helping people end relationships in a kinder and better way. In this episode, I was joined by Farhana Hussain, the UK's first divorce doula. Farhana is on a mission to revolutionise divorce support. As a British Bangladeshi and devoted mother of 3 teenagers, she combines practical advice with deep emotional and spiritual healing, streamlining the cost of divorce on your finances, mind and body. She's been featured as a divorce expert in the media, including the BBC, Evening Standard and Good Housekeeping. We start the episode by talking about her journey to becoming a divorce doula, including her own struggles of finding support in the emotional journey of divorce. She shares her take on cooperative parenting and unique nesting arrangements. We also look at how she helps others through separation and how she gets creative with deciding arrangements for children. I was fascinated by Farhana's process for helping people with their why, which they can use as a guiding light throughout the separation and co-parenting process. If you loved this episode, then please subscribe and rate us on your preferred listening platform. Hello, Farhana.
Hi, Kate.
It's lovely to meet you. Thank you for joining us. I'm super excited to hear all about divorce doulaing and particularly co-parenting and how divorce doulaing helps people to make arrangements for children that are positive and that allow them to thrive. But before we get into the nitty-gritty and the detail of all of that, just tell us a little bit about your backstory. How did you become a divorce doula?
How did I become a divorce doula? Well, if I take it back about 10 years or so when my marriage started to dissolve, I realized that I wasn't getting the kind of support I needed. I didn't know what support I needed, but I knew that the support that I was trying to access wasn't helping me. So at first it was very close friends that I spoke to, and as well-meaning as they were with their advice, and I had really good friends and family who were supportive, I would always go away just feeling like I was completely alone and nobody really got me, and that I couldn't really be myself because I was so worried about being judged, and I was worried about my friends worrying about me. So I found myself self-censoring a lot of the time, holding back a lot of the time. So that's when I started to look for professional help. And back then, whether coaching was available or not, I have no idea because I had never, ever heard of a divorce coach, let alone even like life coaching back then. And it wasn't that long ago, really. But I looked into counselling. And so I then started to go to counsellors. I went through several counsellors because, well, for different reasons, I wasn't just connecting with them, the chemistry wasn't there, or I just felt like they weren't getting me. And I got to the point after about 4 or 5 different counsellors where I just felt like, A, counselling wasn't going to work for me, and B, that nobody was ever going to understand me. I just couldn't convey what was really at the root of my fears and struggles about this separation and divorce. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that divorce is such a unique and significant transition in your life, much like childbirth. Until you've been through it, and like grief, until you've actually been through it, you don't really understand the nuances of it. And I found myself in front of counsellors that hadn't been through a divorce necessarily, although they were good at their jobs and could show their empathy and listen. I just felt that bit was really missing. And I found myself a lot of the time trying to explain those nuances, which I didn't have the vocabulary for, or the energy for, or the real understanding myself. The second thing for me, Kate, was as a South Asian Muslim woman, divorce is already, taboo, but in Western societies, it is shifting. But in many South Asian communities, not all, but many, it is still extremely taboo. And there are so many more layers of complexity that are involved, and much to do with shame and guilt. And so from that aspect as well, I found it really hard to speak to counsellors who, through no fault of their own, just because they didn't live and breathe it, weren't going to understand the situation and how to navigate that in a really sensitive way as well.
Counselling is a very white profession, isn't it? There is very little diversity in the counselling field anyway. And like you say, there are subtleties and those extra layers of shame and guilt from the cultural perspective that are layered on. And if you haven't got that experience or understanding, if you're lacking the experience of divorce and the cultural experience, and it must have felt a very isolating experience, and it must have felt a very silent one for you, I can only imagine.
Absolutely. And that is why my divorce and separation became so drawn out and acrimonious, because I just felt so alone in the process. And like you said, really isolated. And the more isolated I became, the worse the situation became, because the stories that we tell ourselves, of become our truth, become our map of the world. And we're not getting to shift our perspective because we're not talking to anyone else about these things. So my truth, my stories, which became my reality, was that if everybody knew about my divorce, if this divorce actually went through, then I would literally die of shame and guilt, and so would my children be ostracized and labeled, etc. And so this journey, and there's so much more to the story and it's so much more complex than this, but this is the journey that really led me onto becoming a divorce doula, because I myself was really lucky. It took years, but I stumbled. I mean, literally stumbled across somebody who I had gone to have a facial with. And then it turned out that she was a spiritual healer, a facilitator, and someone from a similar background from me.
So when you met her, had you coined the term divorce doula at that point? Because I hadn't heard of that. I've heard of divorce coaches. Obviously, we have a lot of divorce coaches on the podcast, but divorce doula I hadn't heard of before. I've heard of a doula in terms of childbirth, but not in the divorce context. So when you met this other person, you didn't instantly, she wasn't a divorce doula and you didn't decide, oh, this is what I want to do. You've sort of come at this from a very unique perspective.
No, I again, the term coach still wasn't something familiar to me. And it was all about life coaching anyway at that time, or coaching in the workplace. So divorce and coaching, or divorce or any kind of alternative support apart from therapeutic support wasn't something that was part of my world. And the word doula really came from when I did become a life coach and an NLP therapist and started doing having my own clients. A lot of people started to come to me about single parenting, because I was a single parent by this time, asking me how I was transforming my life, etc. And the more I started to use different modalities to support people through, it was more to do with post-divorce work at the time, the more I started to resonate the journey with that of having a doula at birth, because that is exactly what I had. I had a doula at my second birth. And I remember remember it so vividly, this moment where that ring of fire, I was having a home birth and I just thought I was going to die. My nervous system was in complete survival mode. I couldn't see past, this moment here. I just remember the midwives doing what they're trained to do, which is a medical side of things, make sure I am safe and healthy and baby is safe and healthy. My partner was there next to me, trying to figure it out with me. And my doula just said, look at me, connect with your breath. I know what's on the other side for you. She was holding my vision for me. And she just said, you are safe. Just bear down on me. And I was just like, I don't know if I can do this. She was like, you can. And I remember just bearing down with her and just feeling such safety in this rock of a person that she was for me. And I could just let go, be in my body, be safe, be present. And within seconds, my baby was in my arms. So, the message was, I have to go through these emotions. There's no way around it if I want to have what I really want. And as a divorce doula, the word doula is an ancient Greek term, and it means woman who serves. She's someone who is trained to support people as they go through a significant life transition, such as childbirth or postpartum. And they're there to support the woman through the emotional journey and on a practical level as well, and to provide information. And that's exactly what I do.
I love the way you described it as the fact that she was holding your vision when you couldn't hold on to it in that moment. That to me is really powerful, because that's the essence of a successful divorce almost, isn't it? It's when you're in the weeds of it and you're so overwhelmed, whether that's because of the amount of stuff you physically got to think about and do, or whether it's because you're in conflict or you're struggling to see the future, whatever it is, you need someone to hold that vision for you and keep telling you to move forward and to stay with the vision in mind, because it's so easy to lose the vision and get dragged down into some argument or some nitty gritty decision or whatever, isn't it? So I thought that was a beautiful way of describing it. Thank you.
And it was so powerful that it's one of the key modalities I use as a divorce doula is visualization. So, I use a range of different tools, anything from sort of neuro-linguistic psychology tools, tapping into the unconscious mind, use, life coaching tools, but we use a lot of body tools such as visualization and breath and movement and sound as well. Everything that you'd actually be using in childbirth as well, to help you to move through some unique emotions and some very difficult emotions as well, to get to the other side. And it's remembering your why.
And so it sounds like you had been through your own divorce. You met a very spiritual person, just fill in that connection because I interrupted you. So you went, you having your facial, you met somebody who gave you an insight into the spiritual side of life. And then what?
And then my whole life changed. It was,
just a small thing then.
Just a small thing then. And my entire life just changed. And I don't really know how else to put it, because it was literally like my whole life pivoted. And, I use this word very intentionally, pivot, because I literally felt like I just did that. And I went from looking outwards to looking inwards.
So that's essentially what she gave to you then. In that moment, she enabled you to look inside rather than trying to control the stuff outside of you.
Yeah. And that just opened the door to so much dormant power.
I can imagine.
That I never, ever realized, resided within me. And and that just, it changed the trajectory of my life and my children's lives and their children's lives. It wasn't just me and my divorce. It's changed everything. And talk about this a lot with my clients. It's a ripple effect. The work that we do on ourselves is not just going to benefit us. It will inevitably impact everything around you, just like divorce impacts every part of your life. On the flip side, when you're doing the work, it will also positively impact everything.
So you had this kind of, I don't want to sound trite, but a spiritual awakening to all intents and purposes. You started to reflect on what lay within you and use that as your tool. How did you then decide to become a divorce doula? What were the steps that you went through having had an experience? And it always strikes me, it's so amazing, isn't it? So, obviously Amicable is founded on my experience of going through a divorce. You founded your business on the same kind of premise. There are so many of us practicing out here, aren't there, where the personal experience we've used to try and transform and help other people. So all credit to you, because it's this group of people and this type of service, the way that we are trying to help people on their own journey, it's really heartening to find that it's our experience of something that's bad and awful that's happened to us is really trying to change the whole narrative for people, so that there's a different space for people to walk in. when divorce or separation happens. So it's brilliant to connect with other people who are in that same space. So how did you get then to being spiritually awakened, to being a business that can help other people?
It happened in an organic way, but it took an awful lot of inner work, mindset work, spiritual work. Really, I don't want to say it lightly or sound cheesy, but it took a real journey to loving myself again, reconnecting with myself, really loving myself unconditionally, accepting myself unconditionally, to be able to show up and advocate for people to be able to find peace through divorce, find happiness post-divorce, to be able to use divorce as a launch pad to, create a life beyond what you can imagine. And I think for all of us, Kate, you included, I think that takes a lot of guts to do this work and to be strong so that you can, be strong for yourself, but to also be able to hold space for other people as well. That takes an awful lot of investment in yourself first. And again, for me, being South Asian and Muslim, I'm out in the press and media talking about this stuff. That takes an awful lot of inner work to come from a place of real authenticity and to be able to speak with integrity as well. So my journey to becoming a divorce doula very much started with my own personal development and inner work, healing journey myself. And the more and more I did that, the more I realized the power of it. And I was looking around me, seeing that divorce rates were increasing. There were still so many people suffering in a really unnecessary way. Divorce isn't easy and it can be complicated, but the way I've seen people's mental health and physical health be negatively affected and their children's mental health and physical health be affected, every part of their lives. I just thought there still isn't enough support out there for people, and there is not enough conversation about it. But I was still too scared to be really putting myself out there saying, I want to be talking about divorce and supporting people through divorce. And I was going through my own journey as well. But the more I started to see the transformation in my own life and with my own children and really using the tools that I had learned, the more I started to incorporate that into life coaching. So I was a former primary school teacher and in senior leadership. I spent a lot of my time in my later years in education supporting parents of children with special needs. So I was doing a lot of mentorship with teachers and parents. I really enjoyed that aspect of my job. And then as a sidestep, decided to train in life coaching, realizing that once I divorced, I was pretty much going to be a solo parent for a couple of years, which wasn't the plan, but it was just how it was. And I knew that being an employee just wasn't tenable with my new situation and my children's needs. Started setting up my business as a life coach, and then got some other qualifications in NLP, etc. And then more and more people, as they started to see my life transform in my local community or amongst my friends, started telling other people about my journey. And so naturally, I started getting people asking me, Farhana, how are you doing this? How are you building a business while you are bringing up 3 children on your own and, and rebuilding your life again after what we all know was a really acrimonious divorce? And so I started sharing my story, and I realized that actually I had some really specific tools that I use that really helped me to transform my life. And I really wanted to share that with those people who needed it. And so, I started doing more of the divorce work.
Can you give us a taster of some of those skills then? So if someone's sitting here wondering if a divorce doula is for them, can you describe, a typical sort of process, if there is such a thing, or give us some examples of the sorts of work you might do?
Yeah, so obviously I work with people one-to-one and in groups, but no matter how I'm working with an individual or what their unique case is at the time, the key modalities that I will be using with my clients is that around breath and body. So really My sessions will be tapping into your body. So tapping into your breath to help to regulate your nervous system. So before we even start the session, helping you to feel safe in yourself, helping you to feel calm and rooted and grounded. So we use a range of different tools to do that. And that depends on your learning style. And I'll sort of pick that up with my client as I'm going along. But it might include movement where we're sort of standing up and moving to help to regulate and help ourselves to feel grounded. We might do some breath work, some simple breath work patterns. And these tools that I use, whether it be breath, movement, sound, visualization, are also tools that I help them to weave into their day-to-day life as well. So I will be setting them prompts or tasks so they can start to create daily rituals and habits as well. So it's not just about the session. This is about empowering my clients to have lifelong tools, but also tools that they could use in lots of different situations. For example, when they're going to prepare for a conversation with their ex, or going into mediation, or having a conversation with a financial advisor, or talking to your children, just being able to have those tools to get ourselves into that nice calm state so that we can feel safe in our bodies, be able to think clearly as well, and be able to come from a place of just that inner calm and power in ourselves can really just change everything. So I use a lot of breath and body work in my sessions, and it just depends how much of that I will use, and I weave that through the sessions. We're also looking at your purpose as well. So your why. So getting real clarity on why is it you want what you want? What is the purpose of all of this? And we get really clear on this because one of the questions that gets asked a lot in divorce or any kind of personal development is, who am I and what do I want? And they just feel like really big, wide questions. And like, where do you start with that? So it's about who am I and what do I want? Who am I? Connecting with our body. So that breath and body work is really powerful. What do I want? We start to then use visualization techniques to really start to imagine or reimagine how you want your life to be. And why is it you want your life to look like that? We get very specific and detailed on it so that becomes your inner compass. It comes to the forefront of your mind, but it's also your inner compass. So that as you're making decisions, the questions I encourage my clients to ask themselves is, does this serve my why? And it was like my doula, when she was trying to keep me focused, is what's your why? Like you're saying that I don't want this anymore. I want to stop, but what's your why? Remember your vision. And it's like, I want that baby so badly. I want that healthy baby in my arms. And so that is what helped me to then move through that pain. And the final thing that I'll always work on in our sessions is belief. So really learning to believe in yourself. Trusting, because trust is such a thing that is broken through the process of, a relationship coming apart and divorce. We can often not trust ourselves anymore. We don't trust other people anymore. We're second guessing ourselves. We're constantly looking for validation, and that can make us feel really vulnerable, make us feel really insecure, but also can slow down the process of you moving forward to living the life you really want to live. So really learning to believe in yourself. And that can be done through tools such as looking at your inner scripts and stories that you're telling yourself, and looking at them thinking, are they true? Are they out of date? Who told you these stories? And are we going to replace them with some more empowering stories now that are going to help you to believe in yourself more?
It's fascinating, those three things coming together as you've just described them. If you can do that for people, for me, from an amicable sort of perspective, when we help people, it's almost like you're presenting us with the perfect customer at that point, because that's all of the things that you're working on are the things when you're in the process of divorcing and you're having to sort out your money, your property, your arrangements for children. They're the things that we need people to be. So we need them to have a vision. We work on the GROW model. So we help people set goals at the beginning of the process. What are you actually trying to achieve? And just like you said, we then, if we're really stuck on a decision, we go back to the goals and say, does reflecting on those goals enable us to make this decision? Does it take us out of the minutiae and the day-to-day? Does it elevate us to a level where we can see the greater good? And does that unblock the decision? And essentially, you're doing that on an individual basis, aren't you? Helping people to find their vision, to have the tenacity, the courage, the willpower, the endurance to stick to that vision and to be able to tap into it when things get tough. And what we're dealing with is the when things get tough bit, aren't we? When we're trying to get people to actually sort out the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, that goal and vision part that you talk about, often what happens is when we realize that divorce is inevitable, the societal script is, right, let's go to a lawyer, get legal advice, And so you go in there, or going to mediation. They're like, what's your goal? And you're like, well, my goal is I want the house, I want the family home.
I want this.
I want that.
Yes.
And it seems very obvious and clear. You're like, well, of course I want that. That's what I want for my children. And that's in the greater good of everything, blah, blah, blah. And what I get to do, the privilege of my work, is that I have the space and a bit more time with my clients to really challenge that and also get what I call the desire under the desire. So what
why?
Really,
it's like the 5 whys, isn't it? Yeah. It's just, why do you want the house? What does that give you? Yeah. If you had that, what would that give you? Exactly. And if you had that, what would that give you? Yes. You're trying to get down, aren't you? Yeah. Filter down, asking the why upon why upon why, till you get to the real core issue of what somebody wants. And you're right. They might think they want the house, but actually they just might want a safe place to live and to be. And that's two very different things in my world, certainly. Yeah.
And what we want to do is bring that to the forefront of your mind into your heart as well, so that your mind and body are working together, collaborating together, because that's going to give you so much more power, so that one is not holding back from the other. And so that you can then start to create.
Fighting,
Yes, they're not fighting each other. So like your brain's going, this makes sense, but your heart's like, but I'm terrified of being homeless.
We set that up in our scripts, don't we? We set that up, the heart and the head decision as a conflict. But actually what you're trying to do, as you say, is to get the alignment around a core value. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when you can understand and accept that really safety is at the core of it all, that's when we can start to come up with some creative solutions as well then. When maybe having that particular house is just not possible. Okay. And that's just facts of how it is. And numbers don't add up. That doesn't end your world, because we can then start to think of other ways to create safety, because ultimately that's what it's about.
And you mentioned children and working with people to help with their children arrangements. And I know from your experience, you set up what's commonly referred to as a nesting arrangement when you separated, didn't you? So you and your ex nested. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how the work that you do can help unstick some of those because they are really quite emotionally fraught issues, aren't they? Dealing with how you're going to raise children. It's very easy, as you say, on a surface level to say, well, I think it's in the best interests of the children to do X or Y. And there's really nowhere to go with that. So how did your experience of nesting and then your experience of having been on that journey and what you do, how did that all come together to help you create a co-parenting arrangement?
So again, it really, at the roots of it all, was all the inner work I was doing on myself, really building that rapport and that trust between me and myself really, really then helped with me remembering my purpose, my why, which is that at the bottom line was that I wanted stability for my children. I wanted safety for my children. I wanted continuity for my children. They were really, really key for me. And so the more I got better understanding how I was communicating and what I wanted to communicate, and being very purposeful with my language, which was all because I was investing in myself and getting that right support that I was able to do this. This wasn't something innate that just came from me. This is because of what I'd invested in myself. The more I was able to get that across to my ex. Now, my ex, at the beginning wasn't doing any of this work, and communication wasn't always easy. But what happened is that at first, and I think this is fairly traditional, we went 50-50. He wanted to have the children 50% of the time. And so we decided, right, we would have 2 homes. And that's how it started off. But very quickly, my children were sort of in their tween years then. Very quickly, we realised that that wasn't going to work, and our children just weren't happy with spending so much time at their dad's place. And for them, they just kept on saying, it doesn't feel like home. And so over time, we tweaked things. We tried to make his home more of a home for them. We then shifted from 50-50 to 70-30. Things still weren't working out. And communication throughout this whole time was really key. Communicating and just being able to compromise and listening to our children, having open conversations with our children was really, really important. But also giving it some time as well, which is when like the whole me having worked on my nervous system really came in, because trying to, when my children were like getting really upset and pointing the finger at me and saying some things that were really hurtful to me and their dad about, the child arrangements and how it was all set up. And I had to really work in trusting myself that I was making the best decisions at the time, and that these things take time, and that my children were safe throughout all of this. And so really working with my nervous system and staying grounded through the process really helped, so that we didn't catastrophize things or make rash decisions, was really helpful. But over a period, it was probably about a year, that we eventually came to this decision that the children just wanted to stay in my home, which they had attached identity to, was their family home. That was home for them. And that's just how it was. And their dad was starting to get upset, because he didn't want to have children that were upset with him on his weekends either. So it just got to a point where we decided that the children were just going to be with me, and that he would come and spend every other weekend with them, and I would go off somewhere else. Now, nesting in the traditional sense is when you have two homes. You have a family home, which is a children's home and their only home. And the parents, both parents, come in and out of that home, whether it's 50-50, 70-30, whatever the split is, but the children don't move. And each parent has a second base where the alternate parent will live while the other parent is in the family home with the children. For me and my ex, that wasn't going to work, because for me, I just felt like I needed my own private space that wasn't anything to do with him. And I certainly didn't want to be in his space either. So that just, I ruled that out straight away.
Yeah. So I guess the traditional nesting actually requires three homes, doesn't it? A children's home and a home each for the parents, which then makes it a very upper middle class thing that only a very few people can afford. That's always been the criticism, isn't it? So it's very interesting to see what the alternatives are, where you can still take the essence of nesting, but without having to have the huge financial resources behind you that most of us don't have to be able to make that all work.
Yeah, most of us do not have that. And so, some people will try having the second shared home between them, which in my experience with my clients isn't great either, but they're making it work. They're still in the early days of it with my clients.
I think it can work on a temporary basis, can't it? It can work while you're separating, whilst you're getting all the arrangements sorted out. That moving in and out during that interim period can be a good way to keep things stable for the children. But I think you're right, it's a short-term arrangements, because human beings, we all need a base, we all need a home.
Absolutely. So I think I'm absolutely agree. It works in the interim period as you're sorting out things. For us, we have a slightly different setup where I don't call it co-parenting. I call it cooperative parenting. So I am the anchor parent. I am in the home all the time. I am 100% parent, but I wouldn't call myself a solo parent either, because I do have a cooperative relationship with my ex-husband. We discuss, the children, and we cooperate about that, and we'll collaborate on different things together. So we have a amicable relationship. And he comes in and out of the home a few times a week. He has his own keys, but I know which days he's coming. So he'll come after school to spend some time with them. He might tutoring them, taking them to clubs, etc. We'll sit down and have a meal with them, might cook them a meal. It's not as strict routine, but there are certain days he'll come.
The important thing from your perspective is, he's not just turning up at any point of time, because that can be very stressful, can't
absolutely.
it? So
yeah, it's about having
you
boundaries.
have a bounded relationship about when he's going to come, when he's not going to come, but to facilitate that, he has his own keys. These they feel like very small points perhaps to people listening, but when you're dealing with helping people deal with co-parenting and setting things up, it's really important to explore these boundaries, the specifics of these boundaries.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the key thing is having a really good communication system, so that if anything needs to be changed, you have got a reliable, good communication system, and that you are communicating often. With a nesting arrangement, communication is absolutely key. And then being able to hold those clear boundaries as well, which when you're sharing that sort of setup will be tweaked often. And that's okay, so long as the communication is there. And so long as you are going to be allowing for adjustments to happen over time as well. I think having that open mind as well is important.
I think that's really important, because I think sometimes we fall into the trap, don't we, of thinking, right, we have to do the co-parenting arrangements. Once we've done them, that's it, we can move on. But this isn't a single arrangement, is it? I mean, if you've got kids, the minute that they change terms, even in a school, all the timetables all over the place again, isn't it? And there's different clubs and different things you're running around to. So it just is a constant moving feast. They're growing. Their idea of what works and what doesn't work is changing. And when you've got tweens and teens, you've got all the hormones and all the natural behavior of wanting to separate from the family and be more independent to contend with as well. So it just feels like it's quicksand, doesn't it?
And I'm really glad you highlight this. Yeah. I think it's really important to talk about this as well, because I think in the weeds of divorce and everything else that's going on, I think I often see this, and I did this too at one point, is that we forget that we're human and that our children are going through their childhood and all the normal things that our children would be going through in their different developmental stages. It's all within the norms as well as this divorce. So, for example, when, we first set up the whole nesting thing, my ex would come in hoping to, and expecting that everyone would his children would drop everything and come and spend time with him, sit around him like Father Christmas almost. We like joke about it. And now he's like, I come here and I hardly see them, and unless I've like set up something, and I'm like, yeah, welcome to teenage years. I live here with them 100% of the time, and I barely see them. If
I get a conversation out of mine, it's a miracle. Like last night, they both came down at the same time, and we sat talking about, we were trying to plan a holiday, so it was a bit of a not quite an even thing, but the idea, I reflected on the fact that, oh my God, we've just all had a conversation. We've all been in the same room together. Nobody was actually on another device. It was just like a conversation. I was so pleased with myself.
And it's such a rare thing. But it is. And I had to remind him, I was like, look, you don't live with them 24/7, so you won't realize it. Yeah. But this is just normal life. These are just teenagers being teenagers. So the nesting thing,
having that communication, be able to say that to your ex is so important, because otherwise those are the sorts of things that become battle lines, aren't they? Where one parent feels aggrieved, or that they're not getting the time or the attention or whatever. And it's just not that. It's just kids. It's just kids. It's not the divorce. It's not a slur on you or your parenting or anything else. It's just how they are as kids. And I think the only way of communicating that is to have that strong relationship with your partner, isn't it? That communication you were talking about. And I had this real visual picture in my mind, as I said the word quicksand, of imagining all of this kind of murky ground wobbling around, and then these pillars in the ground, and you, the parents, are these pillars, aren't these solid pillars where if you've done the work on yourself, you can be the bit that in that sort of murky, wobbly world, your children can gravitate to ground themselves. And that's what you're giving them. And that's what's so lovely about doing the work on yourself, is that you're not changing the external environment, but you're creating that solid foundation for them to come to and to feel the security that we talked about before.
Yeah, that's a really lovely image there. But as you're saying that, I can almost hear, well, some of my clients and maybe some of your listeners going, well, my ex isn't going to do that. He's not going to, or she's not going to work on that,
Yeah.
So,
but that's okay, isn't it? That's the point. That's the thing. You can do this just for yourself, can't you?
Exactly. Yeah. For years, and I mean years, 2 or 3 years before my ex-husband started to invest in himself, I was doing the work. And it was the ripple effect of that then over time, which I never imagined he would ever. Honestly, how acrimonious our divorce was, I never, ever thought he would then become introspective and start to work on himself. Just didn't think it was possible for people to change like that. But I think he started to see the kind of relationship I was building with my children, the stability I was creating for me and my life and for us. And he said this himself. He was like, well, I want a bit of that. I don't want to be the outsider and the visitor or the bolt-on or something. I want to create that for myself and with my children. And then the only way you can do that is by doing it. I can't force you to, but here is a door. But again, that was very much driven by my vision, my why, which is I wanted stability for my children. So be that from me, from their dad, from a home. The core of it all was stability. And how can I create that stability? So by, pointing out my ex-husband and saying your parenting isn't good enough, does that serve the stability I want to create? So that's the question I always ask. Does this conversation serve? If it doesn't, have that conversation with a good friend, say what you want to her, do it in your journaling, do it in a safe space. But does it serve to say it to that other person? Yes or no is a question to ask yourself.
I think that's the really big takeaway from this, isn't it? Because we can't control what other people do, but that doesn't mean we can't do the work for us and watch the ripple effect, as you have said. It's so important. Nobody listening should be disheartened because they don't think their partner's up to it. It's fine. You can be the start of the change, and you on your own can make the biggest difference. And I always think that's really important to remember, particularly in the co-parenting thing, because the word co-parenting, as you said, there are probably better terms, aren't there? Cooperative parenting, for example. But the word co-parenting sort of puts an assumption that you have to do it together, but you can have a cooperative parenting relationship with one of you taking the lead and starting. And then if you're flagging because you feel ground down because you're the only one trying, that's the point at which you go and do the work on yourself, isn't it? To increase your resource, because you can't force the other person to join in. And like you say, I think the skill here is not telling the other parent what they need to do. And some of us have a more telly style, I guess, than others, don't we? It's even more important to remember that if we're tellers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing just to mention here, because this has come up before, and this was a real profound shift for me when I was doing my work, is that cooperating with your ex, with the other parent, working in collaboration with them, accepting them, whatever words you want to use, doesn't mean you have to like them. It doesn't mean you have to be friends or that you are, condoning what they've done or how they are or anything like that. But it is about having that, I'm cooperating with you for the greater good of something bigger I want beyond you and me.
I think that's a really nice way of putting it and looking at it, because sometimes we get sucked into that, don't we? If I say this or agree to that, does that mean I'm condoning it or thinking it's the best, or meaning that, I'm agreeing with you? It doesn't have to be like that. There is the greater peace, and we talk about the greater good all the time without really wondering what that means. And that's because sometimes we haven't gone beyond a very surface vision for ourselves, have we? And questioned deep enough the why we want this, why that's our vision, why, what will that give us, what will that give us? Oh, there's so many things I could talk to you about. I feel like we're definitely running over time now. I'm running out of time. And we didn't even cover other parenting arrangements either, but maybe we'll come back to that another day. Just for people listening, we've covered such a broad range of things. If you wanted to give people some final tips or advice, what are the key takeaways from your perspective, Farhana?
Again, there are so many things I want to say, but the number one thing I would say to anybody, so that I don't want to overwhelm you or add to your plate or anything like that, is just to tend to yourself. Take good care of yourself, because when you do, that is going to become the centerpiece, the absolute centerpiece to everything else you're going to navigate through divorce, post-divorce, and every new chapter that you voyage into. When you can reconnect and remember who you are and unconditionally honor and love that version of you, taking good care of yourself, you'll be able to handle anything. So that's the first thing I would say, is take good care of yourself and take action early as well. Seek advice early on. It doesn't mean you have to do anything with it. I always say this to people. It doesn't mean anything. You don't have to attach any story to it or anything, but just, information is power, and then do what you please with that. But do not do what I did at the beginning, is allow my stories to become my reality and will just base completely and purely on my conditioning and my fears.
Well, like you say, they're not even your story, are they? They're often other people's stories that you've absorbed and have been superimposed on you because of the way that you've lived and the way that you've been brought up. So, yeah, I think separating those things is really powerful. Thank you so much, Farhana. It's been really lovely talking to you. Where can people find out more information about you?
Yeah, if they can come and visit me at my website, which is www.mydivorcedoula.org.uk. You can also find me on Instagram at My Divorce Doula, and I'm also on Facebook. I've got a private Facebook group called Divorce Dialogues as well.
Fantastic. And for separation and co-parenting support, you can visit amicable.co.uk, where you can explore our resources or book a free advice consultation. So speaking to what Farhana said there about getting advice early, you don't have to act on it, but it's there if you need it. And of course, you can find us on LinkedIn and hear more about new podcast episodes by subscribing for updates and visiting thedivorcepodcast.com, or you can listen on your favorite listening platform. Thank you so much, Farhana, for joining us today. And thank you, everybody, for listening.